Captain Hansol gripped the controls of his small diplomatic ship as he approached the most dangerous war zone in the galaxy. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see the beautiful crystalline planet of Vexar spinning slowly below him. But the beauty was ruined by the terrible sight of massive warships firing deadly energy beams at each other in space. The explosions lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. Each blast meant hundreds of alien lives lost. Hansol had seen war before, but this civil war was different. These weren't enemies from different planets fighting each other. These were family members, friends, and neighbors trying to destroy each other. His communication system crackled to life. A cold voice spoke in broken human language. "Human vessel, you are entering restricted space. State your business or be destroyed." Hansol took a deep breath and replied calmly, "This is Captain Hansol from Earth's Diplomatic Corps. I'm here to meet with both faction leaders as agreed." There was a long pause. Then another voice, this one warmer but still suspicious, said, "We will escort you to the neutral zone. Do not deviate from the flight path or you will be fired upon." As his ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, Hansol marveled at how different this world looked from Earth. The cities were made of living crystal that grew like trees but sparkled like diamonds. Rivers of liquid light flowed between the structures. Even in the middle of a devastating war, Vexar remained one of the most beautiful planets he had ever seen. But the signs of conflict were everywhere. Entire crystal cities had been shattered, their broken pieces scattered across the landscape like fallen stars. Massive craters marked where orbital bombardments had struck. The planet that should have been paradise had become a battlefield. In his private quarters aboard the ship, Hansol reviewed the intelligence files one more time. The Vexarian Empire had been united for over 1,000 years, until 3 years ago when everything fell apart. The conflict wasn't about territory or resources like most wars. It was about something much deeper and more personal. The Preservers, led by Prince Talven, believed that their people should stay exactly as nature made them. They had crystal-like bodies that could sing in harmony and change colors based on emotions. To them, this natural form was sacred and perfect. Any attempt to change it was considered evil. The Evolvers, commanded by General Morkix, thought differently. They believed their people should embrace technology and enhance their bodies with machines and computers. They had replaced parts of their crystal bodies with metal and circuits that made them stronger and smarter. To them, staying the same meant staying weak. What made this war so brutal was that families were split down the middle. Brothers fought brothers, parents disowned their children. Ancient friendships were destroyed over this fundamental disagreement about what it meant to be Vexarian. Hansol shook his head as he read the casualty reports. Millions were dead. Entire star systems had been evacuated. The two most advanced alien civilizations humanity had ever encountered were tearing themselves apart over a philosophical difference. The strangest part was that both sides had agreed to meet with him, a human mediator. Humans were considered a young and relatively primitive species by Vexarian standards. Most aliens saw humans as enthusiastic but naive when it came to galactic politics. Yet somehow, both faction leaders had agreed to this meeting. As his ship landed in the neutral zone of the royal palace, Hansol wondered if he was walking into an impossible situation. How could one human solve a problem that had destroyed a 1,000-year-old empire? The ancient harmony chamber was unlike anything Hansol had ever seen. The walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light, and the ceiling stretched up so high it seemed to disappear into darkness. This room had hosted peace talks for over 1,000 years, but today it felt more like a powder keg ready to explode. Hansol arrived first and chose to sit at the simple wooden table in the center. He had deliberately requested furniture from Earth rather than the traditional Vexarian crystal seats. He wanted both sides to feel like they were on neutral ground, not in territory that belonged to either faction. Prince Talven entered first, and Hansol immediately understood why the Preservers followed him. The prince moved with natural grace, his crystal skin shifting through beautiful colors as he walked. Behind him came 12 guards in traditional armor that literally sang as they moved. The harmonious sound was hauntingly beautiful, like a choir of angels made of living gemstones. But the moment General Morkick stepped through the opposite doorway, the harmony turned into discord. Her enhanced body was a mixture of natural crystal and gleaming metal. Red optical implants glowed where her eyes should be, and when she moved, servo motors whirred quietly. Her warriors were more machine than organic, their weapons integrated directly into their bodies. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The crystal walls actually began to vibrate with tension, creating an uncomfortable humming, sound that made Hansol's teeth ache. Neither leader looked at the other. They sat at opposite ends of the table like two predators ready to pounce. Hansol had attended dozens of diplomatic meetings, but none had felt this dangerous. One wrong word could restart the shooting war right here in this sacred chamber. He could see hatred burning in their eyes when they glanced at each other. Instead of starting with politics or territorial disputes, like every other mediator had tried, Hansol did something completely unexpected. He leaned back in his chair and said in a conversational tone, "You know, I spent weeks studying your history before coming here. What I found fascinating wasn't the war or the politics. It was how incredible your civilization was before all. This started. I'm curious about something." Both leaders looked at him with surprise. This wasn't how diplomatic meetings were supposed to begin. Hansol continued, "Prince Talven, what was your favorite thing about Vexarian culture when you were growing up, before any of this conflict started?" The prince seemed taken aback by the personal question. For a moment his crystal skin flickered through confused colors. Then slowly it settled into warm golden hues as he began to speak. "I remember the Festival of 7 Moons," he said softly. "Every year, when all 7 of our moons aligned, the entire planet would sing together, billions of voices in perfect harmony, creating music so beautiful it could be heard from space. Children would learn the ancient songs from their grandparents. Families would gather on rooftops to add their voices to the chorus." As he spoke, Hansol noticed something amazing. The prince's voice had naturally fallen into a musical rhythm, and the crystal walls began to resonate in harmony with him. Hansol turned to General Morkix. "And you, General? What do you remember fondly?" The enhanced warrior was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her artificially modulated voice carried unexpected emotion. "The innovation ceremonies," she said. "When our young people would present their inventions to improve life for everyone. I remember watching a child no taller than my waist demonstrate a device that could purify water using nothing but starlight. The crowd cheered not because it was profitable, but because it would help people." Something extraordinary happened as she spoke. Despite her electronic voice modulation, she unconsciously began to match the prince's musical rhythm. The two voices, one natural and one enhanced, started to harmonize together. Hansol smiled as he realized something both leaders had missed. Their biological instinct to harmonize hadn't been destroyed by their philosophical differences. Depuis our town, they were still the same species. The negotiations dragged on for 3 long days, and Hansol could feel the frustration building in the room. Every time one side made a small concession, the other would demand something impossible in return. The Vexarian court observers whispered among themselves, clearly expecting the talks to collapse at any moment. On the morning of the 4th day, Hansol decided to try something that would either save the peace process or get him thrown off the planet. Instead of starting with the usual formal diplomatic language, he walked into the chamber with a cup of coffee and sat down casually. "You know," he said, taking a sip, "I made a terrible mistake yesterday. I completely misunderstood your taxation system and probably suggested something that would bankrupt half your colonies." He chuckled and shook his head. "My boss back on Earth is going to have a field day with that one." Both Prince Talven and General Morkix stared at him in shock. Diplomats never admitted mistakes, especially not with such casual humor. The court observers looked scandalized. Hansol continued, "Actually, that reminds me of the time humans almost started a war with the Centauri Republic because our translator mixed up the words for peace offering and declaration of combat. We spent 6 months apologizing for that one." Despite themselves, both leaders found their tension easing slightly. There was something refreshing about this human's willingness to admit imperfection. Over the following hours, Hansol shared more stories about humanity's diplomatic failures, military disasters, and social mistakes. He talked about Earth's own civil wars, environmental destruction, and the centuries it took humans to learn how to work together peacefully. "The thing is," Hansol said, "we humans have made every possible mistake you can imagine. We've fought wars over religion, resources, skin color, political systems, and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. We've nearly destroyed our own planet multiple times." General Morkix tilted her head, her optical implants focusing on him. "Then how did you survive? How did you become united enough to reach the stars?" Hansol smiled sadly. "We learned that our differences weren't flaws to be eliminated. They were strengths to be combined. Our conservatives kept our traditions alive, while our progressives pushed us forward. When we stopped seeing each other as enemies and started seeing each other as necessary partners, everything changed." For the first time in days, Prince Talven spoke directly to General Morkix instead of through Hansol. Do you think we've forgotten that we need each other?" The general's mechanical parts whirred quietly as she considered the question. "Perhaps," she admitted, "in our desire to prove our way was right, we may have lost sight of why our ancestors valued both preservation and innovation." Hansol sensed this was the moment he'd been waiting for. He pulled out a datapad and displayed a holographic image of a small moon in the outer system. "There's something I need to tell you both," he said, his voice becoming serious. "While we've been talking, here I've been monitoring distress signals from Keith 7, the mining moon in your outer system. A massive earthquake collapsed the main colony's protective dome 3 days ago. Both leaders leaned forward, their political differences temporarily forgotten. According to my ship's sensors, there are approximately 8,000 civilians trapped in the underground shelters. They have maybe 48 hours of air left, and the rescue equipment needed is buried under tons of debris." Prince Talven's crystal skin flickered through alarmed colors. "Our environmental specialists could navigate the unstable caverns and locate the survivors, but we lack the heavy machinery to dig them out safely." General Morkix's implants glowed brighter. "Our enhanced teams have the strength and equipment to clear the debris, but the toxic atmosphere and unstable geology would overwhelm our sensors. We'd be digging blind." Hansol nodded slowly. "Separately, either of your factions can save those people, but together, the implications hung in the air like electricity." For the first time in 3 years, both leaders were looking at each other not as enemies, but as potential partners in something more important than their political differences. "Those are our people down there," Prince Talven said quietly. "All of them," General Morkix agreed, her voice carrying no trace of factional loyalty. Hansol knew he had found the key to ending this war. The rescue fleet launched within 6 hours, something that would have been impossible during the war. Hansol watched from his ship's bridge as vessels from both factions flew together for the first time in 3 years. Preserver ships with their elegant crystal hulls moved alongside Evolver vessels, bristling with technological upgrades. It was a sight nobody thought they would ever see again. As they approached the devastated moon of Keith 7, the full scale of the disaster became clear. What had once been a thriving mining colony was now a hellscape of twisted metal and shattered rock. The protective dome that had kept the toxic atmosphere out lay in pieces across the surface like broken glass. Somewhere beneath all that destruction, 8,000 people were running out of air. Hansol positioned his ship above the disaster zone to coordinate communications between the two factions. What he witnessed over the next few hours changed his understanding of what these people were capable of when they worked together. Prince Talven led his team to the surface first. His crystal-based biology allowed him to sense vibrations through solid rock, something that no technology could replicate. He moved slowly across the rubble, his skin changing colors as he concentrated. Every few minutes, he would stop and place, his hands on the ground, his entire body resonating with the frequencies deep below. "I can feel them," he announced over the comm system. "Sector 7, approximately 40 meters down. There are definitely people alive down there, but their life. Signs are getting weaker." General Morkix's enhanced teams moved into position immediately. Her warriors' mechanical augmentations gave them incredible strength and precision. They could lift tons of debris that would have crushed normal beings, and their built-in sensors analyzed the structural integrity of every piece they moved. "We need to be careful," she warned her teams. "One wrong move and we could cause another collapse. Follow the prince's guidance exactly." Han Sol felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the cooperation unfold. Prince Talven would identify safe paths through the rubble, then guide General Morkix's teams to the exact spots where they needed to dig. The evolvers would clear massive chunks of debris, while the preservers checked constantly for signs of life and structural stability. The first group of survivors was brought to the surface after 8 hours of painstaking work. Han Sol watched through his telescopic cameras as families were reunited, crying and holding each other tight. But what struck him most was how the rescuers reacted. Preserver medics worked alongside evolver medical technicians to treat the injured. Nobody asked which faction the survivors belonged to. They were just Vexarians helping Vexarians. "Sector 12 has survivors too," Prince Talven reported, his voice tired but determined. "But the structure is extremely unstable. We'll need to approach from a different angle. My teams can create a support framework," General Morkix replied immediately. "Give us 20 minutes to reinforce the area, then guide us in." Han Sol realized he was witnessing something remarkable. These two leaders who had been trying to kill each other just days ago were now finishing each other's sentences. They had developed an almost telepathic understanding of how to combine their abilities for maximum effectiveness. By the end of the second day, over 6,000 survivors had been rescued. The remaining search areas were the most dangerous, requiring even closer cooperation between the factions. Han Sol watched as Preserver scouts would identify a pocket of survivors, then Evolver engineers would design custom extraction equipment on the spot to reach them safely. "Command, this is incredible," one of the Evolver team leaders reported. "The Prince's people can sense things we never imagined, and apparently our equipment can do things they never knew were possible." Prince Talven's response came through clearly on the open channel. "Your people's innovations are extraordinary. We've been so focused on what we disagreed about that we forgot what we could accomplish together." When the final survivor was brought to the surface, something spontaneous happened that Han Sol knew would be remembered for generations. The entire rescue team, preservers and evolvers alike, began to sing the ancient Vexarian song of gratitude. Their voices harmonized perfectly, creating a sound so beautiful that it echoed across the barren moon. Han Sol smiled as he watched former enemies embracing each other, celebrating not as members of different factions, but as Vexarians who had just saved their people together. The rescue mission's success had created something Han Sol hadn't expected: genuine friendship between the two faction leaders. Prince Talven and General Morkix now spoke to each other directly, often finishing each other's thoughts. The icy hatred that had filled the Harmony Chamber just a week ago had melted away, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. But Han Sol knew that personal friendship between leaders wasn't enough to end a civil war. The millions of Vexarians across the galaxy still saw each other as enemies. Entire planets were divided, families were broken, and 3 years of bitter fighting had created wounds that wouldn't heal easily. On the final day of negotiations, Han Sol stood before both leaders and the assembled court with a proposal that he knew would either end this war forever or get him banned from Vexarian space permanently. "What I'm about to suggest will sound impossible," he began, watching the faces around the room. "Every expert on galactic politics will tell you it can't work. But then again, every expert said you two would never work together to save those people on Keth 7. He activated a holographic display showing a detailed city plan. The design was unlike anything the Vexarians had ever seen, buildings that were part crystal, part technology, with living spaces that could adapt to either lifestyle. "I propose integrated communities," Han Sol said, his voice steady despite the shocked murmurs from the court. "Not separate territories for each faction, but mixed neighborhoods where preservers and evolvers live side by side, sharing resources and knowledge while maintaining their chosen ways of life." Prince Talven leaned forward, studying the designs. "The children, how would they choose their path?" "That's the beautiful part," Han Sol replied. Children would grow up experiencing both philosophies. They'd learn traditional crystal harmonics from preserver teachers and advanced technology from evolver instructors. When they reach maturity, they choose which path feels right to them, or they could even choose to blend both approaches. The court erupted in shocked whispers. This went against thousands of years of tradition. Vexarian society had always been organized around clear philosophical divisions, even before the Civil War. General Morkix's optical implants glowed as she processed the implications. The resource sharing, our people have different needs. Preservers require specific mineral compositions for their crystal growth, while evolvers need rare metals for their enhancements. Hansol nodded. Which is why this could work beautifully. Preserver mining techniques can extract those rare metals without damaging the crystal formations that evolvers' current methods destroy. And evolver technology can create perfect growing conditions for crystal development in areas that were previously unusable. But the most radical part of his proposal was yet to come. Hansol took a deep breath and continued. Most importantly, I propose joint leadership councils at every level of government. No major decision could be made without representatives from both philosophies agreeing. This isn't just about preventing future conflicts. It's about making better decisions by combining different perspectives. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Several court advisors looked like they might faint. This wasn't just ending the Civil War. This was completely restructuring Vexarian civilization. Hansol expected immediate protests, angry rejections, and possibly threats to his safety. Instead, Prince Talven and General Morkix looked at each other with growing excitement. During the rescue, Prince Talven said slowly, "Every time we combined our approaches, we achieved something neither of us could have done alone." General Morkix nodded, her mechanical parts whirring softly. "Our greatest historical achievements, the star drives, the harmony crystals, the planetary shields, they all came from combining preservation of our natural abilities with innovative technology. We've been so busy fighting about which approach was right," Prince Talven continued, "that we forgot our ancestors used both approaches together." The two leaders stood up simultaneously and walked to the center of the chamber. For a moment, Hansol thought they might be about to fight. Instead, they clasped hands in the traditional Vexarian gesture of partnership. "We accept this proposal," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing perfectly. The court sat in stunned silence for several seconds before erupting into chaos. Some advisors cheered, others protested, and a few seemed to be having heated arguments about the legal implications. But Hansol's attention was focused on something else entirely. As Prince Talven and General Morkix continued to discuss the details of integration, other Vexarians throughout the chamber began to join their conversation. Preservers and evolvers who had barely spoken to each other in years were suddenly collaborating on implementation ideas. The treaty signing ceremony 3 days later became something nobody had expected, a celebration. As the documents were formalized, thousands of Vexarians from both factions gathered in the crystal plazas outside the palace. Their voices rose together in the ancient songs of unity, creating harmonies that hadn't been heard in 3 years. Hansol stood on the palace balcony, watching former enemies sing together under the light of 7 moons. He had come to prevent a war, but somehow he had helped create something entirely new. Hansol packed his belongings slowly, savoring his last morning on the beautiful crystal planet. His mission was complete, and honestly, it had gone better than anyone could have imagined. The Civil War was over, both factions were working together, and he had even managed to negotiate some promising trade agreements between the Vexarian Empire and Earth. His ship was scheduled to depart in 6 hours, giving him just enough time to complete the standard diplomatic farewell procedures. He expected a brief ceremony with polite speeches, maybe some symbolic gifts to take back to Earth, and then a quiet launch back to human space. After 3 weeks of intense negotiations, he was looking forward to the peaceful journey home. Soft chime echoed through his guest quarters, followed by an announcement that made him pause in his packing. "Captain Hansol, your presence is requested in the Grand Assembly Hall immediately. This is a formal summons from His Majesty King Rex Thul." Hansol frowned as he adjusted his diplomatic uniform. Throughout the entire peace process, the elderly king had remained almost invisible. Rex Thule had provided the neutral meeting spaces and ensured both factions felt safe, but he had never directly participated in the negotiations. Hansol had only seen him briefly during the treaty signing ceremony, where the ancient monarch had watched the proceedings with sad, tired eyes. The king's neutrality during the Civil War had been both a blessing and a curse. It prevented the conflict from becoming even worse, but it also meant that millions of Vexarians had felt abandoned by their traditional leader. Hansol had heard whispers that some people blamed Rex Thule for not stopping the war sooner. As he walked through the crystal corridors toward the Grand Assembly Hall, Hansol noticed something unusual. Servants and guards were rushing around with an urgency he hadn't seen since his arrival. Flowers were being arranged, ceremonial banners were being hung, and the air hummed with excited activity. When he reached the massive doors of the assembly hall, Hansol's confusion deepened. This wasn't the small ceremonial chamber where diplomatic farewells usually took place. The Grand Assembly Hall was reserved for the most important state occasions: coronations, declarations of war, and meetings with other galactic powers. The doors opened to reveal a sight that took Hansol's breath away. The enormous hall was packed with Vexarians from every level of society. Court nobles sat beside common miners from the outer moons. Preserver traditionalists stood next to evolver technicians, all mixed together in a way that would have been impossible just a month ago. At the center of it all sat King Rex Thule on the ancient crystal throne, looking more alert and energetic than Hansol had ever seen him. The king's crystal skin glowed with a soft golden light that seemed to fill the entire hall with warmth. Hansol walked down the long aisle toward the throne, feeling thousands of eyes watching his every step. This definitely wasn't a standard diplomatic farewell. The formal ceremony, the massive crowd, the king's obvious preparation. Something significant was about to happen, and Hansol had no idea what it might be. Prince Talven and General Morkix stood on either side of the throne, both wearing their finest ceremonial attire. They smiled at Hansol as he approached, but their expressions carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made him even more confused. When Hansol reached the appropriate distance from the throne, he bowed in the traditional human diplomatic manner. King Rex Thule rose from his seat, his ancient frame moving with surprising grace. The hall fell completely silent, so quiet that Hansol could hear his own heartbeat. "Captain Hansol of Earth," the king's voice resonated through the crystal chamber, amplified by the natural acoustics of the living walls. "You came to our world as a mediator, expecting to attempt what many thought impossible. You have exceeded every expectation." Hansol nodded politely, still assuming this was leading to a standard expression of gratitude. He prepared his own diplomatic response about the honor of serving galactic peace and the strength of Vexarian human friendship. But something in the king's eyes told him this ceremony was far from standard. Rex Thule's expression carried a weight and solemnity that suggested something much more significant than a simple thank you was about to unfold. The elderly monarch took a step forward, and Hansol noticed that every person in the massive hall was holding their breath in anticipation. King Rex Thule raised his hand, and the massive hall became so quiet that Hansol could hear the soft humming of the crystal walls. The elderly monarch's voice carried clearly to every corner of the enormous chamber. 3 years ago, I watched my people tear themselves apart over philosophical differences that should have made us stronger, not weaker. I watched families destroy each other, planets burn, and an empire that took 1,000 years to build nearly collapse in hatred. The king's crystal skin shifted through deep, sorrowful colors as he spoke. Hansol could see pain in the ancient ruler's eyes, the weight of watching his civilization destroy itself, while feeling powerless to stop it. "I remained neutral, not out of wisdom, but out of cowardice," Rex Thule continued, his voice growing stronger. "I told myself that taking sides would make things worse, but the truth is, I was afraid of making the wrong choice. My indecision cost millions of lives." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many Vexarians had indeed blamed their king for not acting sooner, but hearing him admit his mistakes publicly was shocking. Royal figures never showed such vulnerability. Han Sol shifted uncomfortably, wondering where this was leading. He had expected gratitude and gifts, not a public confession from one of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. King Rex Thul took another step forward, his gaze fixed directly on Han Sol. Then a young human diplomat arrived, representing a species we considered naive and inexperienced in galactic affairs. This human did what I could not do. He united my people not through force or political maneuvering, but through compassion, understanding, and the courage to admit imperfection. The crowd began to stir with anticipation. Something momentous was building, and everyone could feel it. "Captain Han Sol," the king said, his voice now ringing with authority that echoed through the crystal chamber. "You have demonstrated wisdom beyond your years, courage beyond measure, and leadership that surpassed my own. You saved not just lives, but the very soul of our civilization." Han Sol felt his stomach tighten. The formal tone, the massive gathering, the king's intense focus. This was building toward something far beyond a simple thank you ceremony. King Rex Thul reached into his robes and withdrew an object that made the entire assembly gasp. It was the royal adoption crystal, a sacred artifact that had not been used in over 3 centuries. The crystal pulsed with ancient power, its light reflecting off every surface in the hall. "By the ancient laws of our people, and by the authority granted to me by 1,000 years of tradition," the king announced, his voice growing louder with each word, "I formally adopt Captain Han Sol of Earth as my son and heir to the Vexarian Empire." The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to suck all sound from the universe. Han Sol felt like he had been struck by lightning. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. Adopted, son, heir. The words echoed in his head as their meaning slowly sank in. In Vexarian culture, royal adoption carried the same legal weight as blood relation. The heir to the Empire inherited absolute authority over billions of beings across dozens of star systems. This wasn't just an honor, it was one of the most powerful positions in the known galaxy. The crowd remained frozen in shock for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the whispers began, growing quickly into excited chatter and heated discussions. Some Vexarians looked thrilled, others appeared confused, and more than a few seemed genuinely upset. Prince Talven's mouth hung open in complete astonishment. Even General Morkix, whose enhanced features usually showed little emotion, stared with her optical implants blazing brighter than Han Sol had ever seen them. "Your Majesty," Prince Talven finally managed to speak, his voice cracking with shock. "In 3,000 years of recorded history, no alien has ever been granted royal status. The legal implications alone are exactly what I intend," King Rex Thul interrupted firmly. "Our empire needs leadership that can see beyond our traditional limitations. Han Sol has already proven he can unite what we thought could never be unified." General Morkix's mechanical parts whirred as she processed this unprecedented announcement. "The other galactic powers, how will they react to a human ruling a Vexarian empire?" Han Sol finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. I'm just a diplomat. I came here to prevent a war, not to become royalty," the king finished with a slight smile. "Neither did I, young Han Sol. I was third in line to the throne when a plague took my older brothers. Leadership is rarely something we choose. It is something that chooses us." The implications crashed over Han Sol like a tidal wave. Accept this adoption, and he would become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Refuse, and he might insult the king and damage human-Vexarian relations forever. The entire assembled crowd waited in breathless silence for his response. King Rex Thul raised his hand, and the massive hall became so quiet that Han Sol could hear the soft humming of the crystal walls. The elderly monarch's voice carried clearly to every corner of the enormous chamber. 3 years ago, I watched my people tear themselves apart over philosophical differences that should have made us stronger, not weaker. I watched families destroy each other, planets burn, and an empire that took 1,000 years to build nearly collapse in hatred. The king's crystal skin shifted through deep, sorrowful colors as he spoke. Han Sol could see pain in the ancient. ruler's eyes, the weight of watching his civilization destroy itself while feeling powerless to stop it. I remained neutral, not out of wisdom, but out of cowardice, Rex Thule continued, his voice growing stronger. I told myself that taking sides would make things worse, but the truth is I was afraid of making the wrong choice. My indecision cost millions of lives. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many Vexarians had indeed blamed their king for not acting sooner, but hearing him admit his mistakes publicly was shocking. Royal figures never showed such vulnerability. Hansol shifted uncomfortably, wondering where this was leading. He had expected gratitude and gifts, not a public confession from one of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. King Rex Thule took another step forward, his gaze fixed directly on Hansol. Then, a young human diplomat arrived, representing a species we considered naive and inexperienced in galactic affairs. This human did what I could not do. He united my people not through force or political maneuvering, but through compassion, understanding, and the courage to admit imperfection. The crowd began to stir with anticipation. Something momentous was building, and everyone could feel it. "Captain Hansol," the king said, his voice now ringing with authority that echoed through the crystal chamber. "You have demonstrated wisdom beyond your years, courage beyond measure, and leadership that surpassed my own. You saved not just lives but the very soul of our civilization." Hansol felt his stomach tighten. The formal tone, the massive gathering, the king's intense focus, this was building toward something far beyond a simple thank you ceremony. King Rex Thule reached into his robes and withdrew an object that made the entire assembly gasp. It was the royal adoption crystal, a sacred artifact that had not been used in over 3 centuries. The crystal pulsed with ancient power, its light reflecting off every surface in the hall. "By the ancient laws of our people, and by the authority granted to me by 1,000 years of tradition," the king announced, his voice growing louder with each word, "I formally adopt Captain Hansol of Earth as my son and heir to the Vexarian Empire." The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to suck all sound from the universe. Hansol felt like he had been struck by lightning. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. Adopted. Son. Heir. The words echoed in his head as their meaning slowly sank in. In Vexarian culture, royal adoption carried the same legal weight as blood relation. The heir to the empire inherited absolute authority over billions of beings across dozens of star systems. This wasn't just an honor. It was one of the most powerful positions in the known galaxy. The crowd remained frozen in shock for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the whispers began, growing quickly into excited chatter and heated discussions. Some Vexarians looked thrilled, others appeared confused, and more than a few seemed genuinely upset. Prince Talven's mouth hung open in complete astonishment. Even General Morkix, whose enhanced features usually showed little emotion, stared with her optical implants blazing brighter than Hansol had ever seen them. "Your Majesty," Prince Talven finally managed to speak, his voice cracking with shock. "In 3,000 years of recorded history, no alien has ever been granted royal status. The legal implications alone are exactly what I intend," King Rex Thule interrupted firmly. "Our empire needs leadership that can see beyond our traditional limitations. Hansol has already proven he can unite what we thought could never be unified." General Morkix's mechanical parts whirred as she processed this unprecedented announcement. The other galactic powers, how will they react to a human ruling a Vexarian empire? Hansol finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. I'm just a diplomat. I came here to prevent a war, not to become royalty," the king finished with a slight smile. "Neither did I, young Hansol. I was third in line to the throne when a plague took my older brothers. Leadership is rarely something we choose. It is something that chooses us." The implications crashed over Hansol like a tidal wave. Accept this adoption, and he would become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Refuse, and he might insult the king and damage human-Vexarian relations forever. The entire assembled crowd waited in breathless silence for his response. The massive hall buzzed with confused whispers and heated discussions as thousands of Vexarians tried to process what their king had just announced. Hansol stood frozen in the center of it all, his mind reeling from the impossible situation he found himself in. He had come here as a simple mediator, and now he was being offered control of an entire galactic empire. King Rex Thul raised his hand again, commanding silence from the assembly. His ancient eyes swept across the crowd, taking in every shocked face and confused expression before he began to speak again. "I see doubt in your faces," the king said, his voice carrying clearly. "Through the crystal chamber, you wonder how I could choose an alien, a human, to lead our people. You question whether I have lost my mind in my old age." Several court nobles shifted uncomfortably at having their thoughts so accurately described. Even some of the common citizens looked uncertain about this unprecedented decision. "Let me explain exactly why Captain Hansol is the right choice for our empire's future," Rex Thul continued, his crystal skin glowing with determination. "For 3 years, our greatest military leaders, our most brilliant politicians, and our wisest philosophers all tried to end this civil war. Every single one of them failed." He gestured toward Prince Talven and General Morkix, who still looked stunned by the announcement. These two exceptional leaders, representing the best of both our factions, could not even speak to each other without hatred. Yet within days of Hansol's arrival, they were working together to save lives. The king began to pace slowly in front of his throne, his movements deliberate and powerful despite his advanced age. How did he accomplish what none of us could? Not through superior firepower or political manipulation, but through something we had forgotten, the ability to see our opponents as people rather than enemies. Hansol felt his cheeks burning as thousands of eyes focused on him. He had never wanted this kind of attention, especially not in a situation where his response could affect the fate of entire star systems. Hansol demonstrated wisdom by recognizing that our greatest strength lay not in choosing between preservation and innovation, but in combining both approaches, the king continued. He showed courage by proposing solutions that everyone said were impossible. Most importantly, he displayed humility by admitting his own species' failures and mistakes. Rex Thul stopped pacing and looked directly at Hansol. "When was the last time any of you heard a leader admit they were wrong? When did any of our politicians show vulnerability or acknowledge their imperfections? Yet this young human did exactly that, and it created the trust necessary for real peace." A voice called out from the crowd, an elderly preserver noble who had clearly been building up the courage to speak. "But your majesty, he has no experience ruling an empire. How can someone who has never governed even a single planet lead billions of people across dozens of star systems?" The king smiled at the question. "An excellent point. Hansol has never ruled anything larger than a diplomatic mission. But consider this. Every traditional ruler we have produced in the past century has been trained from birth to maintain the status quo, to preserve existing power structures and to avoid taking risks." He gestured broadly toward the mixed crowd of preservers and evolvers sitting together. "Look around you. 3 weeks ago this gathering would have been impossible. Our traditional approach to leadership brought us to the brink of extinction. Perhaps it is time to try something different." General Morkix's optical implants glowed as she processed the implications. "Your Majesty, the other galactic powers will never accept a human ruler. The Crystalline Confederation, the Metal Worlds Alliance, the Biosynthetic Collective, they will see this as Earth attempting to expand its influence." "Let them," Rex Thul replied with surprising firmness. "For too long, we have made decisions based on what others might think rather than what our people need. Hansol has proven he can unite the divided. If the other powers cannot accept that, then perhaps we need new allies." The weight of the decision pressed down on Hansol like a physical force. Accept this adoption, and he would become responsible for the welfare of billions of beings he barely understood. His choices would affect trade routes, military deployments, and the daily lives of countless families across the galaxy. But refuse, and he might be seen as rejecting the Vexarian people's gratitude. Worse, he could damage the fragile peace he had worked so hard to create. If the king felt insulted by his refusal, it might even restart the civil war. Rexthul's voice grew softer, more personal. I have ruled for 60 years, and my greatest regret is that I failed my people when they needed me most. You succeeded where I failed. The question now is whether you will help us build a better future. The hall fell silent again as everyone waited to see how the human diplomat would respond to the most important decision of his life. Hansol's heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone in the massive hall could hear it. The weight of billions of lives, the future of human-alien relations, and the stability of an entire galactic empire rested on his next words. He had never felt so small and so important at the same time. His mind raced through the implications of each choice. If he accepted King Rexthul's adoption, he would become the first human in history to rule an alien empire. Earth's government would either celebrate this unprecedented diplomatic victory or panic about the responsibility it would bring. Other alien civilizations might see it as human expansion and declare war, or they might respect the Vexarians' choice and open new diplomatic channels. But if he refused, the consequences could be even worse. King Rexthul had publicly declared his intention to adopt Hansol in front of thousands of witnesses. Rejecting such an honor might be seen as an insult not just to the king but to the entire Vexarian people. The fragile peace he had worked so hard to build could crumble, restarting a civil war that would devastate the galaxy. Hansol looked out at the sea of faces watching him. Preservers with their naturally shifting crystal skin sat next to evolvers. With their technological enhancements, all united in their curiosity about what this human would decide. Just 3 weeks ago, these same people had been trying to kill each other. Now they waited together to learn who their next leader might be. Prince Talvan stepped forward slightly, his crystal features showing concern for his new friend. Hansol, he said quietly, whatever you decide, know that you have already given us the greatest gift possible, the ability to see each other as family again. General Morkix nodded, her optical implants glowing softly. The rescue mission showed us that we are stronger together than apart. That lesson will survive regardless of your choice here today. Their words reminded Hansol of something important. This wasn't really about him at all. It was about what was best for the Vexarian people and for galactic peace. He thought about the families reunited during the rescue mission, the former enemies now working together, and the children who would grow up in the integrated communities he had proposed. Hansol took a deep breath and looked directly at King Rexthul. The ancient monarch's eyes held patience and understanding, but also a desperate hope for his people's future. Your Majesty, Hansol began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. 3 weeks ago I came here as a representative of Earth, hoping to prevent a war that could have destroyed everything you have built. I never imagined I would be standing here today, offered the chance to help build something even greater. He paused, gathering his thoughts and his courage. I am honored beyond words by your trust in me, but I cannot accept this responsibility lightly. If I agree to become your heir, I need to know that I will have the support, not just of the royal court, but of the people themselves. King Rexthul smiled, seeming to understand where Hansol was heading with his response. I propose a trial period, Hansol continued, his confidence growing as he spoke. Let me serve as your advisor, and heir apparent for 1 year. During that time I will learn your laws, your customs, and your people's needs. If, after that year, both the Royal Council and representatives from across the Empire agree that I'm worthy of this position, then I will formally accept the adoption. The crowd stirred with interest. This wasn't a yes or no answer. It was something entirely new. Furthermore, Hansol added, I want to establish a new tradition. Any future heir, whether born Vexarian or adopted from another species, should prove their worthiness through service before claiming the throne. Leadership should be earned, not simply inherited. King Rexthul's crystal skin glowed with approval. You continue to surprise me, young Hansol. Your proposal shows exactly the kind of wisdom our empire needs. He turned to address the assembly. What say you, people of Vexar? Shall we accept this human's offer to serve and learn before he commits to leading us? The response was overwhelming. Thousands of voices rose together in the traditional Vexarian song of agreement, their harmonies filling the crystal chamber with beautiful music. Preservers and evolvers sang as one, their voices blending in ways that had seemed impossible just weeks before. As the songs echoed through the hall, Hansol realized that his decision had already changed everything. He wasn't just a human diplomat anymore. He was a bridge between species, a symbol of what was possible when different peoples worked together. The galaxy would indeed never be the same. But perhaps, Hansol thought as he listened to the unified voices around him, that was exactly what it needed.